Daddy isn't gone. He's beneath the kitchen floor," the little girl whispered to the officers. The police immediately began preparations to excavate. Chief James Carter looked down at the incident report just placed on his desk. Reporting party, Clara Hayes. Content, husband missing, no trace, no additional details provided. What struck him was that Clara herself hadn't come to file the report. Instead, her neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, had appeared, accompanied by a 4-year-old girl clutching a worn teddy bear, her face as pale as moonlight. She insisted I not take the child anywhere, Eleanor said, her voice edged with urgency. But the girl said something strange. "You need to hear it yourself." James lowered himself into a chair, his expression softening as he turned to the child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "I'm Lila," she replied, her voice barely audible, like a faint breeze. "Do you know where your daddy went?" he asked with care. Lila didn't respond immediately. Her large, dark eyes trembled, and then she spoke slowly. "Daddy's under the kitchen floor, where the tiles are lighter. He's really cold." The air in the room turned icy, as if a winter gust had swept through. James glanced at Eleanor, whose face had gone ashen. A young officer nearby coughed softly, trying to conceal a shiver that ran down his spine. "What did you say?" James leaned closer, his tone shifting from gentle to cautious. "Daddy's under the kitchen floor," Lila repeated, her voice steady but faint, "where the tiles are a different color. Daddy's very cold." An eerie silence blanketed the room. James signaled Lieutenant Thomas Blake to step closer. "Get Clara Hayes to the station. Assemble a preliminary investigation team. I want the scene checked within the hour." Within 30 minutes, Clara arrived at the station, far more composed than James had expected for a woman reporting a missing husband. She wore a crisp white blouse and black pants, her hair neatly pulled back, her eyes showing no trace of panic or grief. "I've already told you," Clara said calmly, her voice even. "My husband, Ethan, has a habit of disappearing for days without warning. This isn't the first time." James kept his eyes locked on her, studying her demeanor. "You don't find that unusual?" he asked pointedly. She shrugged, her shoulders barely moving. "I figured he'd come back, like he always does." Thomas interjected, his tone sharp. "Neighbors reported hearing arguing and things breaking that night." Clara glanced at him, then sighed, her expression unchanged. "We had a disagreement, but what couple doesn't argue in a marriage?" James nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Did you recently renovate the kitchen floor?" Clara paused, just for a moment, before answering. "I retiled it because of mold. I did the work myself." James raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You retiled it yourself?" "Yes," Clara replied quickly, her voice firm. "I watched tutorials online." Thomas pulled out a USB drive, holding it up. "Your neighbor, Mr. Harold Reed, has a security camera. He provided footage showing you leaving the house with Lila at 3 a.m. and returning alone with a bag of construction materials. Care to explain that?" Clara bit her lip, her first sign of unease. "I didn't want Lila breathing in mold. I took her to a friend's house. The materials were for fixing the floor." James's eyes narrowed. "No receipt for the materials? No contractor? No official notice of repair? And your daughter says her father is under the kitchen tiles. That's quite a coincidence." Clara's fists clenched, her voice rising slightly. "Are you accusing me of killing my husband?" James replied calmly, his tone unwavering. "We're not accusing anyone. We're asking questions, and your answers aren't adding up." Clara turned to Thomas, her eyes flashing. "You're an investigator, but do you know anything about an unhappy marriage? Ethan used to hit me." James cut in, his voice firm. "Do you have proof, medical records, hospital visits, police reports?" Clara fell silent for a few seconds, then exhaled sharply. I didn't go to the hospital. I endured it. Thomas leaned toward James and whispered, "We need an emergency search warrant." The cement smell is fresh, and her demeanor. James nodded. "Start the paperwork. I want forensics at the house first thing in the morning." The next morning, officers arrived at the small house at the end of Maplewood Street, a quiet suburban home now surrounded by an air of unease. Lead Forensic Officer Karen Ellis, a seasoned professional with a cool, detached demeanor, knelt and sniffed the newly laid kitchen tiles. "The cement's still fresh, not fully cured. There's something underneath," she said matter-of-factly. She turned to a technician. "Start drilling at the area with the lighter-colored tiles." Clara was detained in the living room, watched closely by two officers. Lila was not present. Eleanor had taken her to her grandmother's, as James had requested. Karen pointed at the floor. "Drill carefully, layer by layer, starting where the tiles are lighter." The whine of the drill echoed through the heavy, tense air. About 30 minutes later, the first layer of tiles was removed, revealing gray mortar and, beneath it, a glimpse of dark fabric. Karen stopped the team abruptly. "Slow down. Use your hands now, with gloves." The officers carefully cleared away the cement, their movements deliberate. A young officer gasped, his voice trembling. "Oh my God!" A human foot emerged, pale, blue, and stiff. James stepped forward, his face grim, silent for a moment, then turned to Clara. "Anything you'd like to say?" Clara turned her face away, her expression unreadable. Karen's voice was heavy, clinical. Male body, fully wrapped in fabric, dried blood on the head, blunt force trauma. Thomas snapped photos of the scene, then crouched to pick up a small, shattered object beside the body. "It's a phone, cracked, but we might recover data." James's eyes narrowed. "Send it to tech immediately." Another officer ran outside, vomiting into the grass. Karen didn't flinch. "Not everyone's built for death," she said dryly. James studied the body, eyes still open, fists clenched, as if he'd struggled in his final moments. He glanced at the silent house, its curtains swaying gently in the breeze. "This isn't a disappearance or an accident. This is premeditated murder." He turned to Thomas. "Arrest Clara Hayes under Section 142, suspected murder and body disposal." Thomas stepped forward, reading her rights. "Mrs. Clara Hayes, you are under arrest for suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent." Clara scoffed bitterly, her voice low. "Do you know how many years I've lived in silence?" James replied plainly, his tone resolute. "Well, no one needs silence anymore." The clink of handcuffs echoed through the cement-dusted room. Clara didn't resist, only casting a fleeting glance at the exposed tiles where her husband's body had just been uncovered, her gaze hollow, as if she had nothing left to cling to. In the transport van back to the detention center, Thomas glanced at Clara in the rearview mirror. She sat motionless, like a statue carved from stone. He thought to himself, some crimes erupt from rage, but others, like Clara's, are a meticulously orchestrated tragedy. Back at the station, James convened an emergency meeting. Present were the forensics team, data recovery technicians, and Prosecutor Grace Sullivan, a sharp woman with eyes that cut like blades. Karen Ellis spoke first. The victim, Ethan Hayes, died of blunt force trauma to the skull, struck from behind. No defensive wounds, no blood at the burial site, indicating the body was moved after death. James nodded, his jaw tight. This was clearly premeditated murder. Grace folded her hands, her voice steady. For a solid prosecution, we need all the pieces, motive, timeline, physical evidence. The girl, Lila, is key, but a child's words alone aren't enough. A young tech officer, Daniel Foster, stood and presented his findings. We're recovering data from the broken phone. Most of the memory is corrupted, but a few texts survived before it powered off. He projected them onto a screen. A message thread between Ethan and Clara appeared. Ethan, Clara, I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce next week. Clara, if you leave me, I'll make you disappear. Ethan, don't be crazy. Think of Lila. Clara, Lila will be fine without you. She and I will live better. The room fell into a heavy silence. Grace frowned, her voice low. That's enough to prove motive. James signaled to Thomas. Send the investigation team back to Clara's house. Look for property papers, loan documents, anything that shows financial motivation. 2 hours later, Thomas returned with a box of documents. He pulled out a stack. This is the property deed. Ethan was the sole owner. We found evidence Clara was trying to transfer ownership by claiming he was missing. He pulled out another bundle. These are loan receipts. Nearly $240,000 borrowed from Ethan under the pretext of a small personal business investment, with no repayment made. James looked at Grace. Add financial motive to the threat and the scene. That's more than enough. Thomas added. We also discovered frequent private messages between Clara and a man named Nathan Cole on social media. James tapped the table. I want to speak with that man. That afternoon, Nathan Cole, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a dark shirt, was brought into the interrogation room. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around. How do you know Clara Hayes? Grace asked directly. Nathan swallowed hard. We met in an investment group, talked online, met a few times. Were you romantically involved with her? James asked. Nathan hesitated. I had feelings, but nothing improper happened. She always said her husband was terrible, controlling. Thomas pressed. Did she ever talk about hurting him? Nathan took a deep breath. One time, she said, I wish he would just disappear, but I thought it was just venting. Grace repeated, Do you think Clara is impulsive? Nathan fell silent, then answered, No, she's more calculated than I thought. Meanwhile, at the home of Margaret Reed, Ethan's mother, little Lila sat by the window, drawing. Margaret placed a glass of milk beside her. What are you drawing, sweetheart? She asked gently. Lila pointed at the paper, a human figure lying beneath a tiled floor, surrounded by stacked tiles. It's Daddy. He's under there. Margaret gripped the edge of the table, her voice trembling. Who told you about that? I heard it, Lila said, still focused on her drawing. Mommy had a big pan. Daddy said, Don't, and she hit him hard. Then Daddy stopped talking. Margaret shuddered, trying to stay calm. And then what? Mommy said, Don't tell anyone, or our family will fall apart, Lila replied. Margaret buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the interrogation room, Grace concluded, Clara didn't just kill someone. She staged a fake home repair, created a false alibi by removing her child, and coached the girl into silence. That makes this crime even more severe. James nodded. I'll recommend charges for premeditated murder, concealment of a body, and manipulating a minor into withholding testimony. She must face the full consequences. Thomas added, Not just for Ethan, but for Lila. That child has been living in lies and violence since she was 4. Grace checked her watch. Prepare for the preliminary hearing. I want every piece of evidence organized. Lila's words may not be admissible as formal testimony, but they are the emotional linchpin. At Margaret's house, Eleanor asked softly, Do you think Lila really understands everything? Margaret shook her head, her eyes red. She's just a child, but the saddest thing is when a child understands too much, and no one lets her speak. Eleanor choked up. I've never seen a child so calm, yet so full of pain. When Lila said, Daddy's cold, I got chills. Margaret squeezed Eleanor's hand. I'll protect that child no matter what. That evening, James reviewed the case file. He opened a photo of Lila drawing by the window, her face unnaturally serious for her age. He sighed. Some people bury a body after killing. Some bury their child's entire childhood. He looked out the station window, the dim glow of night spilling over Maplewood Street. Tomorrow, the case would officially move into prosecution. The cement had dried, but the blood would never disappear. The next morning, under the biting cold sunlight of suburban Illinois, the forensic team and tactical police gathered around the house at 17 Maplewood Street, once a quiet residence, now surrounded by yellow tape, curious neighbors whispering behind curtains, and a line of service vehicles parked along the narrow street. Karen Ellis, the lead forensic investigator, adjusted her rubber gloves, her steely eyes scanning the kitchen floor. She signaled 2 team members to begin drilling through the newly tiled area. Part of the floor had been examined the previous day, but this time they would demolish the entire 40 centimeters thick cement base at the exact location Lila had pointed out. The saw whined sharply, tiles shattered into shards, and a harsh, acrid odor began to rise, thickening the air. Detective Thomas Blake wrinkled his nose and took a step back. Decomposition smell, Karen confirmed, her voice even, unflinching. Everyone stepped back. Hazmat team move in. Forensic tech Michael Grant slid a crowbar into the cement's edge. Within 10 minutes, damp earth started to appear beneath. Careful, Karen warned. We have signs of a buried object. Dig by hand. The scratching of small shovels echoed in the silence. Layer by layer, fine dirt was lifted out. Sweat beaded down Michael's face, despite the cool 65 degrees Fahrenheit inside the house. Suddenly, he froze, his hand trembling. Something's here. I touched fabric. Karen leaned down, shining her flashlight onto the soil. Stop. Clear the surrounding dirt gently. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. After nearly 10 minutes of careful excavation, the edge of a large burlap sack appeared, dark, crumpled, and blotched with deep red stains resembling dried blood. Thomas stepped back, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered gun, though he knew nothing alive remained beneath that earth. Get a fabric sample. Open the bag, Karen said, her voice low but firm. As the zipper was pulled open, a wave of putrid air burst out. Michael turned and vomited violently into the kitchen corner. Another officer clamped a hand over his mouth, face pale. Inside the bag, a man's body lay curled tightly, forced into the narrow space. His head was soaked in dried blood, with a deep depression at the temple, clear signs of a blunt object strike from behind. James entered, stopping dead as he saw the victim's face, distorted by decay, yet still unmistakable. Ethan Hayes. The girl was right, he said quietly. Thomas stepped forward, his hand shaking as he snapped photos of the scene, fighting off nausea. Karen pulled out a small pouch next to the body, another piece of evidence, a broken phone. Send it to tech. Recover everything, James ordered, his eyes locked on the corpse. Karen nodded. The body's been dead at least 72 hours, no restraints, fatal blow to the head, consistent with a sudden strike from behind. Blood pooled on the back and collar indicates he was attacked while standing, then fell and was bagged. Thomas jotted down notes. So Ethan never had a chance to fight back. Death was quick. Karen added, no defensive wounds on the hands. Left hand still clenched, likely a final reflex before losing consciousness. Another forensic tech, Robert Klein, quietly peeled back the rest of the burlap. He shuddered upon seeing a digital watch still strapped to the corpse's wrist, the screen cracked but the hands frozen at 2:42 a.m. Could be time of death, Karen whispered. matches the camera footage of Clara leaving the house with Lila. James turned to Thomas. Call Grace. Tell her to prepare the indictment file. This is a clear-cut murder case. Nothing left to debate. At the central holding facility, Clara Hayes sat on a narrow metal bed, her eyes blank as she stared through the small barred window. When the door opened, Grace Sullivan stepped in, holding a thick case file. Do you have anything to say? Grace asked bluntly. No, Clara replied, her voice hollow. We've excavated the kitchen floor. Ethan's body was there, a dark fabric sack, blood, the blow, a phone, a broken watch that stopped the moment you took your daughter outside. Nothing to add. Clara gave a faint, bitter smile. I guess you're happy to be right. Grace leaned forward. I don't need to be right. I need the truth. And you need to decide if you're a murderer or a victim. Clara didn't respond. She stood and slowly began pacing her cell, her back to Grace. Without turning, she said, Ethan said he was leaving me. He said he'd take Lila. I couldn't let that happen. Grace narrowed her eyes. You're admitting you killed your husband. Clara stayed silent, her shoulders tense. You planned everything, pretending to take your daughter away as an alibi, buying materials to redo the floor that same night. This wasn't rage. It was calculated. Clara whispered, He drove me mad. I felt like a ghost. If I hadn't struck first, I would have disappeared. Grace's voice turned cold. You could have divorced him, reported him. But instead, you chose murder and buried him under the very floor where your daughter plays every morning. Clara clenched her fists, her voice sharp. I don't regret it. In the digital forensics room, technician Daniel Foster sat by the computer, eyes fixed on the screen. A short video clip, just 38 seconds long, had been extracted from the damaged phone, a priceless piece of evidence. James and Thomas stood behind him. The screen displayed nighttime footage from an internal camera high in the kitchen's corner. In the video, Ethan stood facing Clara, holding a small suitcase. Clara, I'm leaving. My lawyer will contact you in the morning, he said clearly. You're not going anywhere, Clara replied, her voice low. I don't want Lila to see this. Don't make things worse. Ethan turned away. Clara picked up an object, a cast-iron pan, and rushed toward him from behind. The video stopped at that moment. Daniel's voice trembled. That's all. That's the whole clip. James clenched his fists. We have everything we need now. We wait for trial. That night, Margaret held Lila in her arms, the child having fallen asleep after a nightmare, her hair soaked in cold sweat. Margaret whispered, Your dad's voice will be heard, and you will live as a child again, not as a witness to a crime. Outside, rain began to fall, light but cold. Beneath the removed floor tiles, the kitchen now sat empty, but the memory of death lingered, soaked into every tile, every seam of grout, like the last breath of a man betrayed. The official preliminary hearing took place in the regional courthouse of Illinois, the air heavy, almost suffocating. Clara Hayes was brought in, wearing a gray prison uniform, her hair no longer neatly styled, her eyes showing both defiance and exhaustion. On the opposite side sat Prosecutor Grace Sullivan, her face sharp and cold, alongside Detective James Carter and Investigator Thomas Blake. In the public benches, Margaret Reed, Ethan's mother, sat quietly, clutching the hand of her granddaughter Lila, who sat obediently beside her, holding her teddy bear, Bouncy. Grace began calmly. Mrs. Clara, today we give you the opportunity to state the full truth. This is your final chance to explain your actions. If not, the evidence is sufficient to proceed with a charge of first-degree murder. Clara gave a bitter smile. The truth? Since when do those in handcuffs get to tell their side of the story? James replied coldly. Since the moment you picked up a cast-iron pan and ended your husband's life. since you turned your kitchen into a grave for the man your daughter called Dad. Clara glanced at Margaret and Lila, her eyes flickering briefly before returning to a steady calm. Ethan wasn't the saint you all think he was, she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Explain. Clara licked her lips, then began speaking, each word measured and emotionless. When we first married, Ethan was gentle, kind. But later, he changed. He controlled me, questioned every text, every interaction. I quit my job at the cosmetic store because he said I dressed too flashy. I cut off friends because he said they were bad influences. James interjected, "Do you have any medical records, evidence of psychological or physical abuse?" "No," Clara replied immediately. "I never thought to report the man I shared a bed with. I thought I could endure it for Lila." Grace raised a hand, reading from notes. According to Ethan's therapist, Dr. Paul Warner, Ethan shows signs of distress from living with a wife who is impulsive, manipulative, and prone to depressive outbursts. "He made that up," Clara said through clenched teeth. Grace read aloud a message to Clara's former friend, Sophie Turner. "If Ethan leaves me, I'll make sure he never leaves anyone again. There's a way to silence someone forever if you stay cold enough." Clara clenched her fists. "I was just venting." James stood, placing a piece of evidence on the table, the cast iron pan, its rims stained with dried blood. "This wasn't venting. The blood matches Ethan's DNA. This is the murder weapon, not a message." Clara lowered her head, then looked up, her voice dropping. "Why don't you mention that Ethan filed for divorce, that he was trying to take Lila's custody, that he wanted to kick me out of the house I helped build? What did you expect me to do?" Thomas snapped. "No one forced you to kill. There are laws." Clara whispered. "Where were those laws when I cried every night? When I begged him not to throw me away like trash?" Grace spoke slowly. "No one denies pain, but no pain justifies burying a body under a kitchen floor." The investigation broadened to Clara's relationships. James called in Sophie Turner, her former best friend, to clarify the threatening messages. Sophie, a thin woman with curly hair and a distant voice, seemed hesitant. "We were close," she said. Clara demanded attention, was quick to anger. "Anything about Ethan?" Thomas asked. Sophie paused. "Once," she said, "I hate how he looks at Lila, like she's his alone. If I lose her, I have nothing." "I thought it was jealousy." Grace asked, "Is Clara capable of murder?" Sophie was silent, then spoke quietly. "I didn't want to believe it, but when Ethan went missing, I wasn't surprised. I've seen her eyes, not sad, but decided." At Margaret's home, Lila played with building blocks, arranging them into a square with a plastic figure inside. Margaret watched quietly. "What are you making, Lila?" "A bed for Daddy, like in our house," Lila replied. Margaret shivered. "Daddy's not there anymore, sweetheart. He's in a better place." Lila shook her head. "He's still cold. I saw him shivering in my dream." Margaret hugged her tightly. "Daddy loved you so much, but he needs you to be strong. He'll be happy if you're safe." Lila looked up, her voice soft. "Does Mommy love me?" Margaret choked back a sob. "Your mom did something very wrong, but you are not wrong, Lila. You'll be protected." Clara's defense attorney, Edward Lawson, a man in his 50s with graying hair, spoke bluntly. "Clara, I'm not here to deny the charges, but I can help you retain dignity by cooperating." Clara scoffed. "Dignity? I buried that with Ethan." Edward looked her in the eye. "You have one chance to ensure Lila doesn't grow up ashamed of your name." Clara said nothing, but her eyes, for the first time, looked conflicted, perhaps regretful. Grace submitted a report to the judge: physical evidence, phone data, video, witness testimony, and the crime scene aligned. Clara Hayes had motive, opportunity, and means. The act was premeditated, followed by staging the scene and coercing a child into silence. The judge nodded. Permission granted to detain the defendant until trial. James looked out the courthouse window, the early lights spilling onto the street, but he saw no hope. Only a man who died believing in love, a child who lost her childhood, and a woman who chose to wound. At Dr. Emma Collins's child psychology clinic, Margaret held Lila's hand as they entered, the girl clutching her teddy, Bouncy, a gift from Ethan. Lila was silent, walking slowly. Nurse Sarah Miller greeted them. "Hello, Mrs. Margaret. Can Lila come with me?" Margaret nodded. "I'll be outside, sweetheart." Lila turned away, but let Sarah lead her. The therapy room was colorful, with picture books and a dollhouse. Dr. Emma, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes, smiled. "Your name's Lila, right?" Lila nodded. "Do you like drawing?" Another nod. Lila pulled out a crayon and a folded paper, unfolding it to reveal a kitchen with a figure under a tiled floor, shaded gray, faceless. "Who's this?" Emma asked. "That's Daddy," Lila said. "He's under the floor where the new tiles are. He's very cold." Emma closed her eyes briefly. "Who told you that?" "I heard it," Lila said. "Daddy called me in my dream, shivering, saying, 'Lila, I'm so cold.'" Margaret, outside with James, sighed. "She knows more than we imagined." James nodded. "I asked her where her dad was, and she answered with brutal truth." Margaret's voice cracked. A 4-year-old shouldn't live in that truth. In therapy, Emma asked, "Who put Daddy under the floor?" "Mommy," Lila said, her tone like a fairy tale. "She told him, 'Be quiet,' then hit him with the pan. He stopped moving." "Were you scared?" Lila looked down. "I wasn't allowed to be. Mommy said if I told, the family would break." Then she cried. I was scared of her crying. Emma noted post-traumatic stress disorder, a 4-year-old carrying a secret too heavy for adults. That night, Lila drew her father standing with a balloon. "He's not cold anymore," she said. Margaret wept, holding her. Journalist William Hayes approached James. "I want to write a feature, Dad Under the Kitchen Floor, A Child's Truth, without naming Lila." James agreed. "Write with heart." Edward showed Clara Lila's psychological report. "She draws every tile, every word." Clara's hands trembled, silent. James kept Lila's drawing. A girl crying, an adult slumped. "I miss Daddy," in wobbly letters. He wrote, "The smallest bear the heaviest truths." A bank report showed Clara's 2 a.m. withdrawals, $8,000, 3 days before Ethan vanished. ATM footage confirmed it. The house was Ethan's, inherited. Murder secured it. Nathan Cole admitted Clara planned to sell the house, move with him. Grace found $16,000 in a crypto wallet post-murder. Margaret sought custody, vowing to protect Lila. Additional charges were filed, coercing a minor, fraud. Emma testified Lila's drawings showed trauma, not imagination. At trial, Grace presented evidence. Messages, video, finances, Lila's words. Edward argued Clara's abuse, but Grace countered with the pan, blood, and burial. Lila's drawing. A man under tiles, a woman with a pan, a crying girl, silenced the court. Clara admitted, "I thought I was the victim." Lila's drawings showed I'm no mother. She apologized to Lila, asking she not return to the house. Judge David Marshall charged Clara with murder, concealment, fraud, and child manipulation, sentencing her to life. Margaret gained custody. He praised Lila. "Your words saved your father and yourself." Lila whispered, "Thank you for listening." The New York Times headlined, "Justice from a Child's Voice." Clara, in isolation, held a wedding photo, silent. Margaret enrolled Lila at St. Mary's Preschool, where she was just a child. In therapy, Lila drew Margaret, Bouncy, and Ethan with a balloon. "Daddy's not cold. He's in my heart, she said. Margaret watched Lila ride her bike, laughing. Eleanor whispered, "You saved her." James filed the case, Lila's drawing on his shelf. Daddy's under the floor, but now in my dreams. 2 years later, Lila, 6, drew her father watching her grow. He's in my dreams, she said. At Ethan's old bench, Lila asked, "Do people stay if we remember?" Margaret nodded. Lila wrote, "I keep Daddy in my smile." This story teaches that truth speaks, even from a child. Lila's words broke a dark silence, proving children's voices matter. Love, care, and justice save souls from shadows. Please like and subscribe to support our heartwarming stories. Thank you.